Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcavage. We're back for another edition of the Thyroid Answers Podcast. We have another guest today. She is Orshi McNaughton. She's a board-certified holistic health practitioner, functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and she is I think what people would call today more of a biohacker, or it kind of hangs out in that world. So Orshi, welcome to the Thyroid Answers Podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
So I did a little interview for you for something you were doing, and then we had a conversation about having you on the podcast. And you mentioned that you could talk about GLP1, which is like this new hot kind of sexy thing that everybody sings and dances on TV, and everybody thinks now because they're overweight they need these things. So we're going to dig into GLP1, what it is because we make it, and some people they don't even realize that they actually, when they're healthy, they make GLP1, that it's not something that just has to be a drug. So we'll talk about how it's made, what it does when we have our own GLP1 signaling working appropriately. And then we're going to get into like the medication, the pros, the cons. Is it good? Is it bad? There's a lot of controversy about it. So for the listeners, that's what we're going to get into today. So if you've had questions about GLP-1 agonists and whether you need them or you don't need them, the benefits, the pros and cons, we're going to try and cover as much of that as we can. I don't know that either one of us is a expert on GLP-1, but we're going to give as much information as we can. But Orshi, let's start with, can you give everybody a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So my background, I got into the health and wellness world in my mid-30s, and I became a health entrepreneur, and I operated 3 different gyms in Southern California at one time, and over a decade, so almost 15 years. And so I worked with a lot of people on body transformation challenges. That's one thing we did 3 times a year when I was in the fitness world. And at the time, what was in my toolkit was mostly fitness and basic nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And we had really good results. What we did at that time, we put people on a protein-forward diet, whole foods, and we had them sort of log their macros and be conscious of what they were putting in their body. And then they were exercising 3 to 5 times a week, high intensity interval training, strength training. And that worked really well. But what I noticed, even during that time in my fitness world, and I've had more than 10,000 people gone through my different fitness programs back in the day, that people had really great results when they had this focused attention, but especially women in midlife, after they finished, a lot of them gained the weight back and sort of went back to their old habits. So I knew that there were other pieces to the puzzle that we were not addressing. And after I sold my business, I wanted to learn more about health and wellness and nutrition. And that's how I sort of landed in the functional nutrition world. And as I was going through my 40s, I also started to have more and more of the same symptoms that I saw my clients were struggling with, which is fatigue, brain fog, weight loss resistance. And I was trying to figure out like what the heck was wrong with me. I was trying to fix myself. And I went to so many different doctors and practitioners. I think I saw at least 30 plus different types of doctors, from standard like allopathic doctors to functional medicine to naturopathic doctors. And I've tried so many things to fix myself during that period of time. Tried different diets, intermittent fasting. I worked with a naturopath, did like IV chelation therapy, sauna, hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I did NED therapies, ozone therapy, red light. I've done a lot of sort of neurofeedback HRV training, and there's so many things. I tried so many different ways to do hormone replacement therapy because I was trying to figure out what was the missing piece. Like why was I fatigued? Why was I gaining weight? Keep in mind that I had a very good diet. I was always eating whole foods. I was exercising. I was a strength coach. I was lifting weights my whole life. And yet I was losing weight. I'm like, I live so healthy. I shouldn't be in this situation in my 40s. And I don't want to burst I think the biggest issue ended up being chronic stress that I was under for over 15 years of running my business that put me into this sort of survival state where my body was just really struggling for a long period of time. And during this journey is how I discovered GLP-1s, and then we can get into sort of my experience of both having a sort of a really negative experience using them, and then later, once I understood really the right way to do it, I also had a success story, a personal success story using them. So we can get into that.
Absolutely. So I think there's a couple things that are really important that we talk about there. One is you're seeing people that you've got them on like pristine nutrition and pristine workout programs, right? Really focused on calories in, calories out. And when you're doing that and you're kind of holding them to the flame, you can change their body composition. But you said, hey, when they stopped being as pristine with the diet and the fitness piece, the weight would come back. Why? And then you said, and then you kind of went on and say, hey, and then I started having similar issues, even though I was doing the right things. But why? What was your take? And maybe it's changed from where you were then to where you are today. Why do you think those people, they had some body composition change when you were doing like really focused nutrition and fitness, but as soon as they stopped being as intense with those things, why at that point in time did you think the weight was coming back on? Did you have a perception of why? And has that perception changed today?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that at the time when I was, that was more 10 plus years ago. Honestly, I would have given them the tools if I had them, but the only things in my toolkit, and also we were a gym basically. We didn't have the capacity to do a lot of one-on-one health coaching and things like that. But now with sort of what I know now, the things that were missed were hormonal imbalances that a lot of women were shifting into perimenopause, menopause. And I really didn't have the tools in my toolkit of how to address that. Probably a lot of people had thyroid issues too, which I also had no tools to address. And the biggest thing was sleep. We weren't addressing stress management, sleep, and supplementation. And I mean, we had given some people some advice on that, but we didn't really have any specific recommendations or testing to go deeper with people and work on that. So when people had this very focused effort for like 6 weeks, they were seeing really good results, but a lot of that is hard to maintain ongoing, to track your macros and keep up that high protein diet that they were doing. And so while the exercise continued and most people continued working out 5 days a week, a lot of women still regained the weight.
Yeah. And then when you started gaining some weight, right? And then you started doing all of these things to try and to fix it, right? Why do you think they weren't working?
I was looking for answers. I I would have done it if I knew why it was occurring, but I addressed so many different parts. I was really working on my foundational health first. I knew my nutrition and my fitness was mostly on point, and my sleep was on point. I was wearing a sleep tracker, an Oura ring. I had the 8 sleep bed that was tracking my data. I was very diligent with my circadian rhythm. I was always going to bed on time, waking up on time. I was doing the sunlight exposure in the morning. I had some good routines and practices in place. I was trying to manage my stress the best of my ability, but I think the hardest piece for me to address was the stress management and figure out, how do I get my body out of this sort of survival state? My heart rate variability was really low. And then as I was going through my 40s, was getting lower and lower. And that is one piece I still today have a hard time getting my heart rate variability up. Now I'm very diligent and focused on tracking that, and I sort of see the signs when I hit a number below my normal sort of level. I already know that my stress bucket is overflowing at that point, and I need to do everything I can to improve my stress resiliency because all the symptoms are going to pop back up. So this is just from personal experience. I have certain things that happen when my stress bucket fills up. And one of the things I get is migraines, and I have really bad recovery from exercise. And that's when I start experiencing fatigue and brain fog and a lot of things. So I now try to do preventive action to, if I know that I'm not recovering properly, I know there's something is off. So even today, I would say that is the hardest piece for me to address, is the stress resiliency.
Okay. So for the listeners, that this is really important. You may be like, why does this matter? This is all about the state of your physiology. And what oftentimes is missed by clinicians, allopathic, functional, whatever, is that we have the assumption that how our body operates is always the same. And that's not true. We typically operate in one of two states. One state is called homeostasis, which means we make all the energy to run all the systems we want, and we're able to maintain our energy, our sleep, our mood, our temperament, our sex hormones, our digestion, our thyroid physiology, metabolism. We're not gaining weight. We're maintaining a healthy weight. And that's homeostasis. And the other state is what we call allostasis. And this is a state of perceived excessive stress. And sometimes my clients hate it when I use that term perceived, because they're like, it's real. I agree. You're perceived, there's stressors coming at you. It's how we perceive them that makes the difference on our physiology. So this doesn't mean we're making it up, but it is about perception to some degree. But when we have an excessive level of stress on our physiology has to change. We have to put more focus and attention towards the systems that are more important and down-regulate the systems that are less important. And I don't know your personal story and labs and all those things, but at some point you exceeded your capacity to maintain homeostasis, and your body said, hey, there's more, my brain is perceiving more danger, more fear, more threat. And so what happens is the body automatically activates what we call a cell stress or cell danger response that upregulates the fight or flight mechanisms. It increases the sympathetic nervous system. It downregulates the parasympathetic nervous system. And so now our sleep, we may have more problems with good quality sleep. We may have more edginess, more anxiousness, more irritability. At the same time, we've got reduced digestive capacity. We start to develop dysbiosis and indigestion issues. We start to have some slow and steady changes in our sex hormone physiology and other rest and digest systems. And thyroid hormone is critical in the shift from homeostasis to allostasis. The reason I wrote the book and the reason I talk about this stuff all the time is because that's not broken physiology. When you start gaining weight, the weight was not the problem. The problem was the excessive stress condition that initiated the fight or flight mechanisms. And when we initiate this excessive stress response, you are going to have reduced T4 to T3 conversion. That's going to happen. That means your metabolism is going to slow. That means you can't manage the same level of glucose. That means you're going to wind up storing more calories as fat. Weight's going to go up. Sex hormones are going to be dysregulated. Adrenal physiology is going to be dysregulated. And that's the state, unfortunately, that so many people find themselves in. And many people like you, I would imagine, would say at the time, like, I am really healthy. But I have hormone issues and I have these, I'm gaining weight, I'm doing things, but I'm healthy. Because we look at part of our physiology, part of our habits and say, these are good, these are good, these are good, but we're missing some of those other key factors that are creating that excessive stress load. And I think that's great. When you said, I found that the stress, I think we have to clarify that a little bit, maybe the excessive emotional stress, right? Of running the business, financial stress, emotional stress, psychological stress, right? In my book, I talk about 10 different fitness factors, and I've expanded that to 17 or 18 at this point. And stress isn't bad, which I think you would agree with. That's why you exercise people, right? You stress their tissue to break it down a bit and then let them recover. And then you have a bigger, stronger muscle tomorrow. Stress helps us be stronger and more resilient. So it's not that stress is bad. Emotional stress, relationship stress, toxicity stress, food stress, exercise. Stress in itself is not bad. It can help us become stronger and more resilient in time. You see people who've never had stress in their life and they crumble when somebody doesn't open the door for them. Like chill out. That's not a big deal. But if they haven't built up a lot of resiliency over time, and sometimes you see those people who've just had terrible upbringings, and yet they're super successful in life, super happy, super calm, super peaceful, because they've been able to manage that stress over time and become more and more and more resilient. So things that stress out one person don't stress out the other. So I think sometimes we have to look at the load that comes on our physiology and say, hey, am I in this excessive stress state? And if I am, I'm not going to have systems that are all going to work as if we're in homeostasis. And that's why when you tried all these strategies that should have fixed you, and they all can help somebody, but you weren't in a regenerative repair state. You weren't in a recovery state. You were in this fight or flight state. And and when the example I typically give is, if I cooked you a meal, but somebody was stabbing you with a knife, should I get mad at you because you didn't eat it? That's not the priority right now, right? Yeah. If you have a spouse who wants to have sex, but you're dealing with other issues, you're not a bad person. It's just not a priority right now. So we have to consider, when well-intentioned therapies and strategies don't work the way we want them to, they're not necessarily bad strategies or bad things that, like, hey, exercise is bad, I haven't lost any weight. Well, no, exercise is good, but there's other things here that are preventing you from rebuilding healthy, stronger muscles and burning fat that you're not taking into consideration. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I definitely realized after a while that I was in this self-danger response state, but I didn't know how to get out of that state. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my strategies sort of focused on trying to figure out some root causes that I had control over. So I learned that I had really high levels of mercury and lead toxicity. I had also really high levels of mold. So I worked for quite a long time trying to reduce the heavy metal load on my body, try to reduce the mold. I also like to get that bound up, improve my gut health. I was working on just so many different strategies of how do I empty that stress bucket? How do I reduce this allostatic load that I had on my body? But a lot of it was mental emotional stress, and it's really hard to this is a hard thing to tell somebody like, hey, you need to work on your mental emotional stress, because that is the hardest. I would argue that one of the hardest things to work on, because even though like I'm doing my breath work, I'm doing my meditation, but my body is just not getting the message that it just needs to chill out and relax. And so that was probably the biggest piece, and it's something that's still a work in progress for me.
Hmm. Yeah, listen, I think nobody is excited to hear that part of it. And I have clients that I work with, and I know on day one that what's going on between the 6 inches of their ears is the biggest challenge. And it's delicate because some people are like, I need to lose weight, but meantime, they've got massive life stresses, massive work stresses. They have a lot of negative self-talk going on, and they've been in this kind of challenge. Their brain, their limbic system has been perceiving danger for so long that they don't realize that they're in a chronic limbic windup. Their body's in this chronic stress state because it's how they've been operating for maybe the last couple years or last couple decades. So sometimes they don't even realize that how they're perceiving their environment is the issue. And that's not to mean that they're crazy. But if your system is so upregulated, your limbic system, our limbic system is this like protect area. It's like the very primitive part of our brain. But as we grow and mature and develop and experience life, that piece should be calmed down, and our upper brain should develop and say, hey, we don't need that primitive active brain to always be hypervigilant. But when we have trauma in our life, and it's constant trauma early on, it's like we're lifting. It's like our limbic system is getting stronger and stronger and more hypervigilant and more reactive. So small things that happen start getting perceived as like danger. Like, oh my God, like he said that, right? But yeah, he didn't mean it that way. But they take it because their limbic system is so wound up as a threat, as a danger. And that keeps them in this state. And people often don't realize that they're stuck in this cell stress, hypervigilant state. And you can do all these other things. But if the brain and the nervous system is sensing constantly danger, it's hard to heal in that mode because you're not in a healing mode. And we can like fluctuate in and out of that mode. Like, hey, I do some things. Yeah, I'm a little bit better. But the next time you get a stressor, like somebody doesn't show up for work. I didn't get my raise. My husband didn't put the dishes away. Like those little things that shouldn't be a big thing can get blown out of proportion, right? And it happens to men, it happens to women, but we just don't realize it. So the good part is you did realize it, and maybe you're still working on that process, right? And I say sometimes to people, like, if you can't manage that piece, and we've all had our own psychological issues that have happened to us, our parents, our mothers, our fathers, our teachers, our preachers, people coworkers who have just created, I'm always looking for a better term, stress in our life that has caused us to be really perceive it a way that continues to wind up our limbic system, that keeps us in this heightened allostatic state. And so we all have a story to tell, and it's a lot of work to undo that. And if you're in process of working with doing those things, then but it's still a big deal, then those other things, hey, let me clean up my toxicity in my environment, my personal products, my home products, that can all be beneficial. If let me work on breath work and all these things, all of those things are really important. But if the elephant in the room is how I'm perceiving my environment as threat, or I'm perceiving myself as threatening, and you don't address that, there's a limitation to how healthy you're going to get. And I think that's potentially like why your clients sell benefit when you're really intense with a few things, but as soon as it goes away, they're still in that self-stress state, or now they stop doing the really perfect diet and regular, well-trained exercise. And as soon as the benefits of that start to go away, because now we put poor nutrition in, the load just pushes them right back into that cell danger physiology, ramps up inflammation, and slows metabolism.
And to your point, I think when you're in the middle of this chronic stress state, it's very hard to recognize you're actually in the middle of it.
Yeah.
So I was almost for 15 years, running a business as an entrepreneur by myself, dealing with 30 employees. It's a 24/7. There's always something emergency and stressful thing happening at all times. So you always have to be on, you're always problem solving, you're always fixing things, and you always have to be just hustling nonstop to make it work with your business financially, and you can never let go even for a second. And so you can never relax. And this becomes your norm. This is your life.
Right.
For over a decade, right? Now in retrospect, like no wonder my body gave up by the time I got to the tail end of this, right? But when I was in the middle of it, it was my normal state. It was what I was doing every day. And on top of that, I was also a fitness competitor. I was doing fitness competitions and trying to look apart. And I was also going into perimenopause and handling all these things at the same time. And my central nervous system just couldn't take it anymore. And I think when I sold my business, all of a sudden my body could say, okay, now I can like slow down a little bit, because at least you got this big giant rock off your shoulder. And that's when my body it felt like went into this metabolic coma. Say, okay, it's time to slow down, try to fix things. But then I just couldn't figure out for a while, like, how do I get out of this state?
Yeah, because I want to touch on a couple things, because I want to get your opinion on that one piece. But I want to back up, because you're talking about like there's a lot of stress going along with the business, and anybody who's run a business knows that. But it is about perception. And no offense to you, I've run businesses and I would say there's times it's really stressful. But again, it's still about perception, because somebody else under the same load, the same business, same thing, same employees, same stressors, they may perceive it differently. I love this stuff. I love the chaos, right? And they thrive in that environment, and somebody else, it really starts to impact them. So it's about the load. Go ahead.
Sorry to say that, but at the time when I was in the middle of it, I had not perceived that I was under stress at all. As a matter of fact, if you would have asked me, I'm the most balanced person on the planet. Like, I'm doing my thing, I'm eating healthy, I'm doing all the right things. Like from the outside that you wouldn't have seen, like perceive me as stressed.
Yeah.
But now in retrospect, I'm realizing that I was under chronic stress. So interestingly, I wasn't perceiving myself as being stressed. And that's kind of the interesting thing when I deal with other women that are the type A, sort of high performing women, that they always tell me like, oh yeah, my mental health is perfect. I'm handling the stress, no problem. But in reality, it is a problem, right? But they're actually not seeing it.
Right. It can be subconscious, and you're just not aware of how the impact it's having. Listen, I said this multiple times in the podcast. Like, I got into into bow hunting, and I fully realized, and when you're bow hunting, typically you're spending long times sitting in a tree stand by yourself, nobody around, and it's hard to do anything else because you're constantly waiting for this animal that's got to come in within close proximity. And any little movement that deer sees way better than you do. And so you're sitting there for hours and hours and hours by yourself, just kind of staring into the woods. But what I realized when I first started was I couldn't sit there. Like if you asked me, I wouldn't have told you I was overly stressed either. Like I'm running a regenerative medicine business. I got coaching kids. I got a family. All they call financial, like all this stuff, right? But if you asked me if I was stressed, I would say, no, I'm not stressed. But when I sat in the tree stand by myself, I had a hard time sitting there because what would happen is when I wasn't in the mix and I was on my own, all of that stuff that I kind of put in a closet in my brain would come, all these thoughts, all these feelings would come out. And I'm like, I got to go do something. Like, I got to go do something else because that would then kind of suppress those things. And that's when I realized that, man, I may have more, I may not be managing this emotional piece as well. And it comes out maybe as certain things, but there's a lot going on in there that I'm not paying attention to, and maybe on purpose. Like, I don't want to deal with that. But even though I wasn't dealing with it, it was still having an impact on my chemistry. But just like you, like I would have said, no, successful, nothing stresses me out. I'm good to go. And I think I wasn't aware of how those stressors were impacting my physiology. Now, when I ran, blood chemistry, I'd be like, well, why am I glucose resistant? Why am I putting on a little bit of, why are my thyroid antibodies elevated? Like I'm doing everything right. I get up, eat right. I get up and exercise every day, like 4 hours of sleep. That's all you need. Like, really trying to be highly productive during the day. But I wasn't aware of the load. And that's what really had an impact on my health and changed a lot of my thinking.
And I think a lot of is why I think doing like lab work is so helpful just with the people that you're working with to show them like, look, your body is showing you that you're under stress, or it's showing you these markers are dysregulated. You telling me you're eating because it's so funny when I talk to people, and I'm sure you hear this all the time. You ask them like, okay, tell me about your symptoms, what's going on? And it's like, oh yeah, everything is normal. But they have in reality all these symptoms and all these problems, but they are not even it's not even in the top of their awareness of their state of what's going on. And I think to the point that you mentioned that you need to get out into the woods, be by yourself, put yourself in a different situation to have this realization. Sometimes we have to get out of our routine. We have to get out of our normal setting to have the perspective to look back and say, oh, okay, what I'm doing is, in fact, I'm really stressed, or in fact, I have these issues going on. For me, for you, it was the bow hunting. For me, I ended up doing some psychedelics, and that really helped shift my perspective about my whole life of what I was doing, and have that perspective change. And I think, I don't know if I could have had that moment without those tools in place. And that was something that I found very helpful.
I find that very few people are willing to talk about what their elephant in the room is, right? They may not be aware. I've had people that definitely were not aware. They had chronic pain, they had chronic weight issues, they had chronic health issues. And definitely you ask them and talk to them and nothing. Life is good, life is perfect, life is good. And then all of a sudden they're like, and you ask the right question, they're like, well, I don't talk to my son. I don't talk to my daughter. What do you mean you don't talk to them? And then you start to hear the story, and then you start to find out that it is a big deal for them. And it's kind of this, there's repressed anger and there's all this stuff going on. And then when they get the right help to manage that, either to change the situation with their relationship or to change their perception of the relationship, that's when I've seen people who have done, he's saying, with lots and lots of practitioners have their breakthroughs. They always thought that the practitioner wasn't very good, or they didn't have the right protocol or the right recommendation for their medication or whatever. And I'm like, that's usually not it. Those all, because on somebody else that may work. We're missing the piece for what's the biggest contributor to your stress load. And when we uncover that, then we can fix it. And everybody likes it when we can find the bacteria, a virus, a toxin, like, oh, I just had parasites. And so I did a parasite cleanse and everything got better. Though I find that most of the organism issues, the toxin issues help a little bit, at least temporarily. But if we don't change the operating state, and a lot of times if there's psycho emotional issues going on, those are the biggest factors for the vast majority of people. So you're going through your challenges, you're going through your struggles, and then at some point, I'm guessing you've tried a bunch of things and you've found GLP-1 medication. Is that what happened? Because it's the sexy thing on TV today. So at what point were you introduced? And we'll get into what it is in a second. But how did you get introduced to GLP-1s?
Yeah, so part of this journey for me, the reason I even became a functional nutritionist, I started running so many labs on myself. I think I ran more than 50 labs in the course of a few years, trying to figure out like what the heck was wrong with me. And I started the Women's Biohacking Conference more than 3 years ago. And as part of that, I got to interview a whole bunch of experts in different areas of health optimization. And I had this female endocrinologist that I was interviewing that was sort of like a longevity, health optimization, sort of holistic angle on endocrinology. And her sort of biohack was this combination of hormone replacement therapy, GLP-1s, and thyroid optimization. That was sort of her recipe of getting women getting their metabolism going and getting them off of weight loss resistance, and sounded really good. This is the
And
first
you
time
know
I
I'm
ever
cringing over here over that whole thing a little
well,
bit, right? Go ahead.
I'm gonna
Go ahead.
just I'm telling you because this was my first introduction,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounded really cool at the
Mm-hmm.
time. It sounded like, okay, well, let's just do these things and it's just gonna all of a sudden magically work
Mm-hmm.
and get my weight off and and I'm like, okay, I'm in, let's try it. And I am a biohacker at heart. I try everything. But I also like to, do labs, track my data, understand how I feel. And I jumped into it very, with really no experience and
Mm-hmm.
without a lot of context to GLP-1s. And the first time I tried it, I actually was on liraglutide, which is Victoza, which is like the first generation GLP-1s. And we can get into that in a bit of, the different type of GLP-1s. It's kind of an older diabetes medication. And so I was on that medication. It's normally an injectable daily. I was only taking it twice a week because she knew I wasn't diabetic. What I was trying to do is really just get off this weight loss resistance. And I was on it for 3 months. And the first month I had some weight loss and some success. And by the way, I was already on hormone replacement therapy at the time. I was already doing some estrogen, progesterone. I was really close to menopause at that point, kind of like the tail end of perimenopause. And and so the primary sort of N=1 experiment was the GLP-1 at the time. And I lost a little bit of weight. And after a month, I completely plateaued out. I continued for a couple of months. I didn't want to increase my dose. And I didn't make any more progress. And after 3 months, I'm like, why am I injecting myself with this thing? It's not even working. And I basically just stopped. And definitely not the right way to do this. And I crashed and burned. I not only quickly regained the weight that I lost, but I over the course of the following maybe 6 months to a year, I also put on an extra 15 pounds after being on GLP-1s. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a really negative initial experience. And I said, okay, GLP-1s are not for me. This is not the right tool. I don't even know why I tried it. And I just kind of wrote it off as, okay, this doesn't work. And then a couple of years later, just like you, start hearing everybody's using Ozempic and all the newer forms of GLP-1 peptides, semaglutide and then tirzepatide. And I started learning more and more of how people are using it, all the kind of pros and cons that I think we're going to dive in with this
Mm-hmm.
conversation. And so just last year, actually, I have given it another try with tirzepatide, which is another, the newer form of this medication. And just quickly to share the results from my latest trial of hopefully doing them more the right way. I did lose 30 pounds like in 6 months. I lost 15% body fat, and I managed to add 2 pounds of muscle mass during that same process. I improved a lot of my markers of, obviously, my insulin sensitivity improved, my cholesterol markers got better. And I actually, so many of my inflammation, everything has gotten exponentially better in the last 6 months. But I do have now a very nuanced understanding of how you should or shouldn't be using these tools, and we can kind of dive into that.
Yeah. So we're going to get into what GLP-1 is to begin with, but are you still using it?
So I am now on a tiny dose. So I'm in sort of the process of weaning myself off of this
Mm-hmm.
drug because I hit my goal for the most part. But I am subscribing to a very, very slow tapering off of the medication. So
Mm-hmm.
at the moment, I'm still on it.
Yeah. So I guess that's going to be the real experiment is what happens 6 months in 6 months after you're off of it. Because I would agree that if you take it and you do some of the strategies that become really important so you don't lose muscle mass, and it doesn't create a bigger problem, it can provide a change in your physiology for sure. Um, Question is, are we restoring health or are we managing an allostatic state? And that's why I think probably when you were coming off of it the first time, it's the reason it plateaued. And when you came off of it, weight went back on because you still have the same allostatic state, inflammatory state going on. So you trick the system for a bit, but then once you're off of it, the inflammatory process is still there. You have less muscle mass to support caloric burn. So we'll get into all that. But let's talk about what GLP-1 is, because a lot of people only know that there's GLP-1 as a drug, and they don't know that GLP-1 is actually a peptide that we make, or a hormone that essentially that we make in our own body. So do you feel comfortable kind of talking about what it is and where it comes from?
Yeah, so GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, is a hormone produced in the gut,
Mm-hmm.
and that regulates metabolism, blood sugar, appetite control, and it's secreted by the intestines in response to food intake. So it balances insulin and blood sugar, stimulates insulin release when needed, and it suppresses glucagon. So it prevents the liver from overproducing glucose, and it helps to stabilize blood sugar. And, now with the medication, it also slows gastric emptying. Now, as far as like our natural GLP-1s, I'm not sure how, maybe you can speak to that, but I know the medication itself slows gastric emptying, which delays the stomach emptying, and it increases satiety, preventing the blood sugar spikes in the body. It also reduces appetite and cravings, acts on sort of on the hypothalamus to decrease hunger and food-seeking behavior for people. and it supports fat and energy metabolism, enhances insulin sensitivity, promotes fat oxidation, improves metabolic flexibility. So it has a lot of benefits. Obviously, producing it endogenously is the best, but there are some people do have less, that make less GLP-1s. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit more of how we endogenously making it.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is this story that some people can't make enough, or we just don't make it as we get older. And I think that is a story, but I don't think it's an appropriate story. Okay. So for the listener, when you eat, within minutes of eating, there are signals that cause your intestinal cells, they're called your intestinal L cells, if anybody cares, to release GLP-1. And GLP-1 then goes into the bloodstream, goes to the pancreas. And at the pancreas, GLP-1 stimulates the release of what we call insulin. It's actually preformed insulin. It's already made in the pancreas. It's ready to go. And the GLP-1 releases insulin, that insulin to be released right away. The other thing it does is it inhibits the pancreatic production of glucagon. And why is that important? Because in a fasted state, we're still needing glucose, and the liver is constantly making glucose to kind of fill the need of the body. So when we eat, increase GLP-1, and all the signaling works appropriately, we release insulin. We'll talk about why that's important in a second, and we release the glucagon. The glucagon decreases liver production of glucose, so our glucose doesn't go way too high, because if we had glucose coming in from our food and glucose coming from the liver, then we're going to have a high blood sugar in a fed state. In a fasted state, it's always going to be a little bit high, probably a little bit higher. So, why is this important? When we eat, if we don't have insulin released right away, then our blood sugar is going to go way too high. And so by increasing GLP-1, we have what we call the first phase insulin response kick in. So we dump out 50% of our insulin production occurs in those first couple minutes. And so your blood sugar is going to go up a little bit, but then it's going to plateau if you've got healthy gut physiology, GLP-1, insulin production, all those great things. And then it's slowly, that first phase starts to go away. But as we continue to eat and the physiology is working appropriately, then that GLP-1 continues to stimulate what we call the second phase insulin response, which then drives the production of more insulin. And that's how we can get our blood sugars to blood sugar levels to stay fairly stable. The problem occurs is this isn't working in a lot of people. So have you, in your journey, we know that everybody makes GLP-1. Sure, there may be some people with genetic polymorphisms where it's not as efficient. But in your travels and studies, what was the thing that you learned about why your GLP-1 wasn't working as effectively and you needed more?
Yeah. And to be honest with you, I don't really know the answer to that question. I do have a theory that it may have to do with gut health. I had sort of dysfunctioning GI health my whole life since I was a child. I had, a little more history. I had a very challenging childhood. I had like 3 major surgeries before the age of 13. I was on a lot of antibiotics. I was, born with a C-section. I wasn't breastfed. I had really bad microbiome. I was constipated as a kid my whole childhood, and I didn't even know I was constipated because I didn't know what normal was as a kid. So, and I was on antibiotics at least 3 times a year, like during the flu season. I was always sick. My immune system was really compromised. I had a lot of allergies. And this is before everybody had allergies. So this was back in the 70s. So, uh, so my gut health was never great. And I always was trying to work on, now, obviously, I understand the importance of gut health so much more in the last, 10 years. But I still, for example, when I do labs on myself, I have like zero akkermansia in my GI. Like it doesn't even like exist in my microbiome. So there are certain like keystone species of bacteria that are not even there. And so I definitely feel like my gut health is not optimal. I always have to work on supporting it. So that's just my theory.
Would agree. I mean, I would say that almost everybody who has a GLP-1, um, who uses GLP-1 and it seems to work, they've got some type of dysbiosis and reduced production of GLP-1 because of a dysbiotic GI tract. And again, a lot of people don't know they have a dysbiotic GI tract. When they have a weight issue, a lot of traditional practitioners aren't going, well, you probably have a gut issue, or you probably already had an inflammatory issue. They're just saying you have a weight issue, and if you get rid of the weight, then you'll be healthier. The reality is, the reason they gained the weight is because they had an inflammatory process to begin with. And since 70 to 80% of the immune system really surrounds the GI tract, there's a high probability that everybody who's got chronic low grade inflammation, weight gain issues, likely has problems within the GI tract, whether they know it or not. And so that I would, listening to a little bit of that history, I would say, if you've had chronic gut issues, that kind of goes with your story. Like, hey, as long as I'm really managing these other pieces, I can kind of keep that piece in check. But as soon as I add more stress to the picture and I'm not as pristine, now that the dysbiosis and GLP-1 signaling becomes a bigger issue. And I would say these things all tie together with thyroid hormone as well, because if there's excessive stress, whether it's from the gut or wherever, or there's inflammation coming from the gut because of the real and perceived stress, that's going to affect T4 to T3 conversion. It's going to affect thyroid gland function. But it's really important because if there's inflammatory processes going on, then there's going to be reduced conversion of T4 to T3 long before anybody has a thyroid gland issue. And if there's reduced conversion of T4 to T3, that reduction in T3 is going to have an impact on bile acid physiology, which is then going to have an impact on the amount of GLP-1 that's actually produced. So as the conversion of T4 to T3 goes down, as circulating T3 goes down, there's less GLP-1 production because of the change of the bile acids. So absolutely, anybody who's got estrogen dominance may affect their GLP-1, because estrogen dominance can affect the sphincter of Oddi, which reduces bile acids moving into the GI tract. If they have low T3, that sphincter of Oddi may not work as well, decreasing bile acids into the GI tract. And it's kind of a convoluted story between how much T3 is in circulation, how much T3 is effectively working at the liver, which regulates bile acid physiology and then helps regulate the amount of GLP-1 in the GI tract, the level of immune and inflammatory process, the level of bacteria in the GI tract, and the maintenance of the tight junction. So it's a complex picture, but definitely when there's dysbiosis and those L cells aren't functioning appropriately for multiple reasons, you don't have GLP-1 signaling to the pancreas, you're going to lose that first phase insulin response. And what's that going to feel like? You're going to eat, your sugar's going to go up, and then your sugar's going to crash, and you're going to be tired, fatigued, hangry. You're going to want that Snickers bar or whatever the TV commercial is, right? In time, you may actually start to lose the second phase insulin response. So, hey, my glucose is staying higher well beyond like an hour or 2 hours. And it's even potentially elevated later in the day when I'm even in a fasted state, potentially. You're going to have compromised insulin production, potentially compromised insulin signaling. So it becomes this kind of really, really messy situation, but definitely problems in the GI tract and chronic stress can have a huge impact on the production and the function of it.
And I also want to just mention that I spent more than 15 years on a low carb diet. So I was in a very low carb sort of paleo diet for precisely for the reason of trying to optimize my insulin sensitivity. I was also keto for about 6 months that I didn't do well on keto at all. I feel like it put me into more of a high stress state to be on a ketogenic diet. And even before I started, because I did a lot of lab work, before I got on GLP-1s, like the second time, my blood glucose was, because I do a lot of labs, I did labs before, during, and after, were 89, which is not like super optimal, but it was just maybe slightly higher than the optimal range. And my fasting insulin was 5.4. This is before getting on GLP-1s. And, like I would say the optimal range is maybe like 2 to 5. So I was slightly higher, but I was not really high, partly because I eat a whole food diet. I really don't have a lot of carbs in my diet. I don't eat grains at all. So I didn't start in a state of already being excessively insulin resistant. And yet, when I got on the GLP-1s, it really felt like it optimized my blood work even more. So like after being on the GLP-1s, my glucose got into the optimal range, my fasting insulin got into even like the lower end of optimal range. And the biggest benefit that personally I saw from being on the medication was sort of the impulse control and cognitive benefits that I've got from it. And I already would consider myself with somebody with a high impulse control because I've done a ton of fasting. I can be very restrictive in my lifestyle if I want to be, and I can say no to things. But being on the medication, even though I was on a tiny dose and I'm still on a very, very small dose, it just made it so incredibly easy that it just like completely effortless to say no to. There's just absolutely no food noise, no cravings of like the bad type of foods, like the stuff that I'm trying to stay away from. And I don't have already addictive behaviors. I never drank, I've never done any drugs, I've never done anything really addictive, but this sort of dopamine-driven urges for sugar and other things just, I mean, I would have some maybe sugar cravings occasionally, but for the most part, that would be like one of my only vices. That completely disappeared. And it really sort of just made it, I also felt this mood optimization, a stabilization effect of just improved like serotonin signaling in my brain, of better, like just less anxiety, more like just more emotional control overall. So beyond like the weight loss and appetite control, I really felt like these benefits were the ones that it's almost like you only have so much willpower in a day. And while before I had to like consciously say no to having a dessert, or when I go to have my coffee in the morning to have a croissant, I would have to consciously say no to that. Now it was so effortless that I could put that willpower into doing more strength training, to work on other important things in my life. It was just, everything was more effortless. So I would say that was the biggest benefit that I felt.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pieces there, and I could give you the answers for a lot of the things that you experienced, but I think the fact that you were doing a paleo diet, your blood sugar is a little bit high and your insulin is a little bit high, was the reason it was you probably managed it as well as you did. You had gut-based issues, you got inflammatory issues, you got decreased GLP-1. So if you have decreased GLP-1, you're going to have less insulin, appropriate insulin for sugar. But if you minimize the amount of glucose coming into the system and you're on a very low carb diet or a ketogenic diet, you're going to be able to keep the glucose in a range. And maybe it would have been lower if you had good pancreatic signaling going on. I wouldn't have been found it hard to believe that you had low T3. Comparatively, like the numbers could be good, but the conversion rate maybe not great. So with the inflammatory issue, I could see where you could manipulate those or manage those with your dietary strategy. And then the keto diet, like why did that not go so good? When when you have when you have cell stress, inflammatory mechanisms, decreased conversion of T4 to T3, you downregulate the number of mitochondria that you have as part of that cell stress response, and you reduce the efficiency of being able to burn fat as a fuel via what we call beta oxidation in the mitochondria. Going through the hormonal change didn't help you either because estrogen really drives mitochondrial function as well. So it may have become way more apparent that there was some problems as estrogen starts to bottom out as you move through the change. But I find a lot of people that do a ketogenic diet, they seem to do pretty good, and then it plateaus or they don't see the benefit at all, and they're wondering why. Like everybody else is having benefit, you're not. You've got a low metabolism state going on, and you're not efficient at burning fat as a fuel because of the inflammatory state, the low thyroid hormone conversion, and it becomes difficult. But we can manage numbers a certain way. The GLP-1, why does that make you feel better? Like because there are GLP-1 receptors in the brain that say, "Hey, I'm satiated. I'm good. I don't need to have any more." Yeah. The GLP-1 slows the metabolism down. When we make it naturally, it slows the metabolism down so we can break down and digest our food appropriately, and it sends signals to brain like, "I'm good." But without appropriate GLP-1 production and signaling, yeah, we're not getting the satiety signals. The brain is saying, hey, I still need sugar. I still need energy. I still need sugar. And so we do have those cravings, and it can definitely have an impact on our chemistry. So yeah, we can explain all the kind of what you're experiencing. And I don't know, and I'm not doctoring you, but I would say that, yeah, there's still a chronic load of cell stress load, inflammatory process going in. And that's where the drug came in and kind of helped. It didn't help as much as you wanted the first time, but maybe that's because your strategy was more, let me just take it and it'll change my chemistry as just, hey, this is just a drug. This is what it does. And it didn't work out that way. But did the second time that you took it, maybe you learned some things like, if I'm going to take the drug, it can improve certain aspects, but if I don't do some other things, it's going to have a negative impact on my system like it did the first time. So what did you learn differently between the first time and the second time?
Yeah, so the first time I really didn't make hardly any changes to what I was doing. I was just taking the medication. Mm-hmm. And I was expecting the medication to do the heavy lifting and just all of a sudden turn on that switch of all of a sudden allowing my body to lose weight. And I really didn't understand what I was doing. And that's the truth. A couple of years later, I also was taking tirzepatide, which is, I would consider, a much better drug than what I was taking, which is the first gen sort of Victoza, liraglutide. So I was taking a much better medication. I was taking it in very, very tiny doses. So I think the dose is really, really important. So the couple of things that I feel like are non-negotiable for people that want to give it a try, and this is just my contrast. It's the first of all, actually, before I talk about what my suggestions are, I want to say like how, like when you go to like a regular allopathic practitioner, and I'm just using tirzepatide as an example, they start you off at a 2.5 milligram dose, and every month they'll start titrating your dose up, almost doubling your dose every month. And at some point they may stop, but for most people, this gets titrated up pretty high. And in my personal opinion, that might be the right approach for somebody who's full-blown diabetic because they need that much medication in their system. But somebody who is more in the sort of a body recomp range of less than 50 pounds to lose, and not necessarily even pre-diabetic, you will do much better in tiny, small doses of just giving your body this little support. And so I think the first mistake that most people make is just get on the medication, they titrate the dose up too high, they end up with all kinds of GI issues, they stop eating, or their calorie consumption goes down to almost nothing. They certainly not getting a nutrient-dense diet, not getting enough protein in their diet. They initially enjoy seeing like, oh my God, I'm losing weight. Great. So they stop eating even less and let just the medication do all the work. And then because of the GI issues that they start experiencing, a lot of people have nausea and, vomiting and diarrhea and constipation, partly because of these high doses that they get on. Then because some of the side effects get so bad, a lot of people stop and then they regain a lot of weight. So a better strategy, in my opinion, is to start with the smallest dose. Don't titrate your dose up unless you absolutely don't see any improvement over a couple of months. But for most people, you will. And you need to 100% optimize your nutrient intake and protein intake because you will be consuming less food. So you need a very nutrient-dense diet, a lot of protein, healthy fats, fiber. And I would argue that you need to eat like 1 gram of protein per ideal body weight. So for a female, let's just say your ideal body weight is 130 pounds, you need to eat 130 grams of protein, and you need to track it because if you're not tracking your consumption, 100% you're under eating. Almost everyone is under eating protein. And when you're eating less calories, you need to be super conscious of this to preserve your muscle mass. Skeletal muscle is expensive to maintain, and without enough protein and strength training and signaling that you need to preserve this expensive tissue, the body start breaking it down. And if you do nothing and you just continue your regular diet, almost half of what you lose is going to be muscle mass. And that's going to put you in a really bad situation when you titrate off or stop the medication. And it's going to be much easier to regain the weight. You're going to regain the weight really fast, kind of like what I did the first time I stopped. That is exactly how not to do it. So I think it's really important to have the protein plus maybe even supplement with some amino acid supplements and creatine to preserve the muscle mass. So that would be number one. Number two would be strength training. It would be absolutely mandatory. You need to lift heavy weights to signal the body to retain that muscle. That is non-negotiable, that you have to do that. You do have to address some hormonal imbalances, and I really recommend doing that before you even start. As you mentioned, high cortisol, maybe thyroid issues. Talk to Dr. Eric about that and addressing some of these issues before you get on the medication. So you really want to start with the lifestyle interventions first and see how far you get with that before you even give this a try. You got your nutrition, diet, stress management, sleep all need to be on point. And I think you also need to address gut health and digestion. So if you already have GI issues, they can get worse. So you can be more constipated. Acid reflux is a really big issue with semaglutide, especially, which is Ozempic, partly because, again, the doses are titrated really high, and and a lot of people already are on PPIs to begin with, and then they get on Ozempic or semaglutide, and their reflux gets so bad that they have to stop the medication. A lot of people also can experience bloating. So if you have GI issues, you should address them before you even get started. And if you are somebody like me that working on their GI issues and managing it, it's really important to take digestive enzymes so you can break down the food better. Because when you have slower gastric emptying, it's really important that you have proper digestion, and you also have to hydrate more. So you need to drink enough water, potentially have some electrolyte supplementation along the way. I also recommend addressing like the microbiome, some probiotics, polyphenols, and really supporting your gut barrier, maybe even butyrate, to improve your GI health. And then, of course, we talked about managing stress and sleep. That is a key to address even before you start. And again, for me, it's a work in progress, and for all my clients, but having really good sleep hygiene, circadian hygiene that I touched on earlier is really important. So, and then also realize that this monotherapy approach is just using this one drug and expecting this to do all the work for you is not the right way to go. This is just sort of one tool in your toolkit, like one lever to pull on, but you don't want to pull too hard on this one lever, because then you're going to have all kinds of side effects. So you have to go very, very slow and plan on titrating off the medication. You don't want to be on this forever, because it can create a dependence, and then it can put you in a much worse position if you do stop. And you have to consider it. These are expensive medications. You may not want to be on it forever. And it's not a crutch. It's not a magic pill. It's not something that is going to do all this for you. So I'm going to stop here, but I can add more.
Oh, that's good. I'm going to just touch on a couple of those things from a chemistry standpoint, since that's probably more my wheelhouse to kind of get into that. So it's really important to understand everything she said. I agree with. While I don't prescribe medication, and it's not a thing I typically would ever recommend. If you're going to do it, there's a better way to do it, and there's definitely a bad way to do it. Why do a lot of people lose weight when they don't work on all the stressors that are creating the problem to begin with? Because GLP-1, as it goes up, it slows down stomach motility, GI motility. So food sits in there. So that triggers, and the increase in GLP-1 you're taking from the drug is going to tell the brain you're satisfied, even if you didn't get enough food, and that food's going to sit in the gut. So, and we're decreasing that GLP-1 is going to decrease the amount of glucose in the bloodstream. So we're getting less glucose from our food. We're getting less glucose from the absorption from the food. We're getting more insulin produced, which is going to pull more glucose out of the tissue, and we're decreasing the liver's production of glucose. So your body needs glucose. So where is it going to get it? That's what Orshi was talking about. It's going to start breaking down the most expensive tissue, which is muscle tissue, and we can then start reducing glucose, and you're going to lose muscle mass. And the reason she kind of said, hey, I gained a lot of weight back, as she's doing it the first time, she probably wasn't exercising as well. She wasn't getting the right amount of protein to help rebuild and restore. Maybe stressors were higher then than they were when she was on it the second time. And so she lost muscle mass. So now you go back to eating a bit, you stop taking the drug, or the drug's not working. And now you have less muscle mass to burn calories. And so what do you have to do with those calories? You have to store them. So that's one of the mechanisms. That's really important. Two, it never, it may change. And I think in your situation, it is a tool that can change sugar physiology, which just changing some of the sugar physiology is going to reduce some of the inflammation. High levels of sugar in the bloodstream creates oxidative stress and inflammatory mechanisms. So we know that it can change a lot of issues. So just having less that you weren't able to manage, it can be good. Definitely agree with the fact that if you start ratcheting up the GLP-1, especially since I think almost everybody who's got a weight issue has a inflammatory gut-based issue and slow metabolism going on already. But now and especially you were saying a lot of these people are already on stomach acid medications. The reason they're on stomach acid medication is because they're not making enough HCl. If they don't have enough HCl, they can't kill bacteria coming from their food or from their oral cavity. That means they're not producing appropriate digestive enzymes, and the whole digestive tract is going to be compromised to begin with. So now they take an omeprazole or some other kind of medication that further reduces stomach acid. They're already making their dysbiosis worse. If you don't have the appropriate acids and enzymes to break the food down, and now you take more GLP-1 that then slows down the metabolism, that's going to lead to more bacteria fermenting your food, creating gas, creating bloating, and creating reflux. Because now that all that food's kind of sitting in there, and your body is kind of pushing all the bile acids and stomach acids up into your stomach and into your esophagus, and it's going to create irritation. So it can be a problem. We are meant to poop. And if we slow down the metabolism too much, it can create a lot of putrefaction in the GI tract and create a lot of gas and bloating and pressure in the GI tract. So I agree. This should be something, even though I don't prescribe, I think we get into trouble when we start thinking more is going to be better. There's a reason it's tightly organized in the physiology. And I didn't want to bore anybody today with the chemistry of how thyroid physiology, meals, and bile acids all regulate it. But if you're going to do it, you should really consider working with somebody like Orshi, who knows the things that really need to be done along with this. So it is a tool in a process, not the tool in a process. And then the outcome is probably going to be better long-term. As far as the stress management piece, I think that's critical because the excessive stress load is what created it to begin with. So if you don't ever fix that, you're only ever manipulating your chemistry. You're never restoring chemistry. And then the hormone piece of it, we may have different opinions on this because more from a biohacking standpoint, there's the optimization standpoint, and that's okay. We're allowed to have potentially disagree, but you may agree as well. When there's reduced hormone production, reduced T4 production, reduced T4 to T3 conversion, some people look at that and say, hey, I'm going to optimize the T3 and assume it's going to work long-term the way they want it to. I think just like Orshi said, the GLP-1 is a short-term tool to help make change. I'm paraphrasing what I think she was saying. T3 medication can be a short-term tool to provide some benefit. Problem is, especially in integrative and functional medicine, we're using it as a long-term strategy to manipulate it into some predetermined range and assuming that if we manipulate a value into range, we've restored well-being and normal physiology, and we haven't. There are people who, if they have poor function, especially if they've lost their gland, having a little T3 helps keep cholesterol under control, helps make them a little bit more adrenal hormone, but it can also create a side effect. And so we shouldn't, in my opinion, if we're trying to restore physiology, be ratcheting it up and ratcheting it up, ratcheting it up, ratcheting it up. Same thing with sex hormones. we have this story that all women, as they get older and go postmenopausal, need hormone replacement therapy. I don't think that's the case, but I'm not anti either. I have clients right now who, because they have inflammatory mechanisms, because they have reduced T4 to T3 conversion, have high cholesterol in their bloodstream. They can't get it into the tissues to make it into androgens and then be made into estrogens. And because they don't have appropriate estrogen levels and they have low thyroid hormone function, they really have a lot of tiredness and fatigue. Getting them some estrogen in the short run to get into a more optimal level for somebody who's postmenopausal, it doesn't mean they have to have the estrogen of a 25-year-old. It means they need to be well managed from an estrogen. That estrogen may just give them a little bit of boost for their mitochondria to have a little bit more energy and be a tool in a process to help somebody heal and recover. So I think, and we talked about this on your podcast that we were doing together, I'm not anti those things. And as a biohacker, that's, I think, kind of the thing that biohackers doing. Can we manipulate this? There's a difference between biohacking as a short-term strategy to recover health versus what I see a lot of people doing. They're trying to biohack lab values into a range and assuming that's restoring homeostatic regulation. And if they're in allostatic regulation, it doesn't. It's just manipulation of values, and in long term tends to create more challenges and problems. But in the short run, could it give that patient some symptomatic improvement? Could it create some chemistry issues that help us improve their health and well-being? And I think it can, just like supplements can. Some of these drugs could be potentially helpful, but here in the States, we have this kind of weird thing that if some is good, a lot is better. And we do this with lots of medications. We do this with supplements. And so I think that's the thing we need to be cautious of. It's a tool in a process, just like hormone replacement therapy is a tool in a process. Now, as I say that, if you say, but I want to do hormone replacement therapy, I don't want to change my lifestyle. Great. I want to take high dose T3 because I feel better, but I don't want to change my lifestyle. I want to take GLP1, but I don't want to change my lifestyle. Great. That's your right to do that. But there are going to be potential consequences, and you should be okay with those too. And knowing that, hey, I'm not changing things. I think what Orshi and I are both saying, I'm going to let her finish her comment because I know she's chomping at the bit to say something. I think we're on the same page when it comes to when we're doing these things, these are tools to help us recover health, not manipulate us into some perceived state of health based on, hey, I created chemical balance, so you should be healthy. And unfortunately, I think we wind up gaslighting way too many people that, yeah, I've optimized your labs, you're healthy, or you should be healthy. And that's where people get frustrated. Well, if you've optimized it, why am I overweight? If you've optimized it, why is my libido stink? If you've optimized it, why am I here? So I'll let you have the last word on that.
So I think I am, and I'm using myself as an example of somebody who spent 10 years trying to optimize my lifestyle in every possible angle, and I was still gaining weight. So, I'm somebody who really spent so much time studying, researching this, trying different things, and yet I was still gaining weight. And sometimes these tools can help you, give you the little nudge and help that you need, or maybe that signal to your body. And so for me, on just commenting on hormones, there are definitely, for me, I'm postmenopausal now for several years. My estrogen, progesterone is not coming back. It definitely helps me have a little bit more energy, controls some of my menopausal symptoms. But testosterone, on the other hand, for me, bounced back. I had very low testosterone levels when I started. And after I lost the weight, I did a lot of strength training. I did all those things. My testosterone levels came back. I was using a little bit of TRT in the beginning, and then I got off of that because my natural testosterone bounce back. So I think it's important to monitor and test and see where your numbers are and see how you feel. You may need it for a little bit, you may not. I also have to say that during the beginning part, I did have a little bit of HPX's dysfunction, and my adrenals got overtaxed because I was doing so much strength training while I was also reducing my calories. And I went into, I could feel like my adrenals were in bad shape. And during that time, for a shorter period of time, I did take 5 micrograms of liothyronine to kind of kickstart my adrenals a little bit. And then I got off of them because I felt good later. So for me, it was sort of like a short-term tool. My thyroid labs are still looking pretty good for the most part. But I did feel like that little manipulation actually helped kickstart my adrenals back up and have energy again and feel good. I also need to stop training 3 times a week because I wasn't recovering enough. I went down to 2 times a week, and then eventually I can get back to, again, training more. But I think you have to really tune in with your body. Listen to your body. When your body's telling you, like, I'm not recovering, I'm struggling, you need to pull back of the stressors that you're putting on your body. And it's a little bit of a chicken or an egg situation because you do need to build muscle. You do need to have these hermetic stressors to improve your stress resiliency, but the dose makes the poison. Sometimes you have to know when to pull back and stop. And just one more thing I want to add is that when you're using GLP-1s, what you have to focus on is resetting your set point of your weight. And it's really important to really go slowly. And this is why staying on a really low dose and having a very slow weight loss is very much preferred to a quick weight loss. A lot of the side effects and problems that people get is because they titrate the dose really high. They have this really rapid weight loss. Half of it is muscle mass.
Mm-hmm.
They are hardly nutritionally nourished. And when they stop, if they stop potentially, the body haven't had a chance to recalibrate to like a lower set weight point. Like the body still think it's like 100 pounds overweight. So when you stop, the body starts to go back to that old set point. But when you lose weight really slowly, doing all the right things with lifestyle interventions, good nutrition, all the things that we mentioned already, slowly the body starts resetting. And I think that's why it's also super important that you lose the weight super slowly and also taper off super slowly with the right strategies.
Yeah, I would say the reason it works better when you do it slowly and you work on all the lifestyle factors is because you're ultimately reducing the excessive stress load to a point where your body says, okay, danger averted. Let's go back to healing mode. Let's get back to homeostatic regulation. When it's done really quick, you're manipulating the chemistry. You haven't addressed the cell stress load. You haven't induced inflammatory issues. We can manipulate weight loss. We can do, everybody's probably familiar, maybe not anymore, but there was a show called The Biggest Loser that was on TV and it was a #1 TV show. And they made dramatic changes in people's weight. I'm going to say weight. I was going to say health, but I'm going to say weight because they starved them and they made them exercise 6, 8, 10 hours a day. And so
it was like a torture exercise.
Right. And people argue about macros don't matter, calories don't matter. Listen, everything matters. Calories in, calories out does matter. And if you starve somebody and if you massively reduce their intake and massively increase their burn rate, they will lose weight. It's just going to happen. It doesn't mean it's going to be healthy. And I think that's why they'd never have a Biggest Loser reunion show, because most of those people never change the life and lifestyle factors. You'd often see those people go back home and they'd gain weight back because the environment, the lifestyle, the stressors, the life, the family, the kids, the work, the load, as soon as they got back to reality, the load was excessive. The exercise, the malnutrition wasn't there anymore, and the weight went right back on. So, we've got to be careful. So I think I think like everything, it's a tool to help recover. We used to use medications a lot as tools. You take this, hey, take this for a short term. This is going to do this, and then we're going to get off it. That has all changed. Lifestyle medications are the tool. And this is potentially one of those things that people are going to think is a great lifestyle tool without changing the lifestyle. I don't think that's the great strategy. But I got to be fair, we also have done this with people with supplementation too. And I'll see people coming into my practice on 40 supplements, and they're like, I need all of these. I'm like, for what? Well, they've all been prescribed for all my conditions. Well, that is not what supplements are. They're supposed to supplement. They're supposed to be a tool to help recover. They're not you shouldn't be taking 40 supplements per day. That's not functional medicine. That's not healthcare. That's just as bad as taking, in my opinion, and people can disagree. But if you're taking 40 supplements to manage symptoms and you still don't feel well, that's an expensive alternative to medicine. It's really just greenwashing medicine, in my opinion, because we haven't addressed the root issue to begin with. So, Orshi, let's do this because you've got podcast as well. You got some other things coming up. So let everybody know where they can hear more about you, what you do, and what things you have coming up.
Yeah, so the Optimized Women podcast is where you can come and listen to Dr. Eric, my conversation and interview. And I interview different experts on women's health optimization. And so please tune into that. And then we also have the Women's Biohacking Conference, which is, I have 2 accelerator events coming up, one in May, where Dr. Eric is going to participate as well, where it's on metabolic health. And the entire event is on different topics related to metabolic health, specifically for women. So I hope you tune in and listen.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on the Thyroid Answers podcast, and I think we did a pretty good job getting through all this. We talked about what GLP-1 is. We talked about the pros of taking it and how to maybe do it right. Maybe some of the things that if you take it, if you don't do things, it could go wrong. We talk about how GLP-1 works in the system. So I think we covered it really pretty well, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast. And for the listeners, I'll probably have another one because this is a really heavy topic and we can dig into some of this in more degree, but I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and having a discussion.
Thank you so much.